Oak Brook had always been a town of perfection, where everything seemed to fall into place as if by design. The streets had grand mansions, ivy-clad walls, and meticulously maintained gardens. The people who lived here didn't have to work for their wealth. They were born into it, like the Prescott family. For the residents of Oak Brook, there was nothing more revered than the Prescott's legacy. Ava Prescott was no exception to this legacy. The youngest child of Vivian and the late Nathan Prescott, she had always lived under the shadow of her family's power. But on the evening of October 5, 2022, Ava Prescott disappeared, leaving her family, her friends, and the entire town in a state of shock. Welcome back to Beneath the Surface, where we uncover the dark, hidden corners of true crime that are often too shocking for the surface to ever reveal. In today's gripping story, we dive into the life of Ava Prescott, a young woman born into wealth, power, and a family with more secrets than anyone could have imagined. What started as a missing persons case quickly spiraled into a web of lies, deception, and murder. But the question remains, how far will a family go to protect its legacy? In this episode, we'll uncover the untold truths about the Prescott dynasty, the secrets they tried so hard to keep buried, and how one woman's courage would ultimately bring it all down. This is the story of Ava Prescott, a woman who was silenced, but whose message could never be erased. The Prescott family's grand charity gala had been nothing short of spectacular. A glittering affair at the family estate, Prescott Manor, which stood like a palace on the edge of Oak Brook. Ava, in her delicate navy blue dress and diamond earrings, had been the centerpiece of the evening, as her mother, Vivian, made speeches about community and philanthropy. Yet, despite the glamorous facade, Ava seemed distant. Her eyes, usually so full of life, appeared weary, as if she carried a burden no one could see. She slipped away from the gala unnoticed, her absence hardly felt in the whirlwind of socializing and celebrating. It wasn't until hours later that anyone thought to look for her. Her car, a black Lexus, was found abandoned by the town's outskirts, just beyond the thick woods that bordered the town. The vehicle's engine was still warm, the driver's side door ajar. There was no sign of Ava anywhere, no clues, no signs of struggle, just the emptiness of the night. By morning, the entire town was in a frenzy. The Prescotts, who had always prided themselves on their spotless public image, were now in a crisis. Oak Brook's police chief, Elizabeth Hawthorne, a no-nonsense woman who had worked in the small town for over 20 years, immediately began a search. But the more she looked, the more questions arose. By day 3 of the search, Detective Grant Foley was called in from Brookston, a nearby city known for its more advanced resources and investigative capabilities. Chief Hawthorne had known Foley for years. He was known for his sharp instincts and unwavering commitment to solving the most complicated cases. However, this case would prove to be one of the most perplexing of his career. Foley arrived at the Prescott estate early that morning, greeted by a grim-faced Vivian Prescott, who had already begun to organize the search. Her composure was unnerving. She was a woman who appeared impervious to emotion, her smooth, ageless face a mask of concern and control. She greeted Foley with the kind of politeness one might expect from a high-society hostess. Yet beneath that politeness was a palpable tension. Vivian's ice-blue eyes darted nervously as they spoke. "My daughter is missing, Detective," she said, her voice calm but strained. "She's probably upset, maybe ran off for a while, but I trust she'll come to her senses soon. Please, you must find her." Foley nodded, but something didn't sit right with him. The coldness in Vivian's demeanor, the ease with which she talked about her daughter's disappearance, it felt rehearsed, as if she was more concerned about preserving her family's image than about the well-being of her own daughter. Over the next few days, Foley spent time observing the Prescott family dynamics. His primary focus was Ava's brother, Carter Prescott, the heir to the Prescott fortune. Carter, who had inherited his father's business acumen, was the one everyone assumed would take over the family business. He had been groomed for leadership from a young age, and he carried himself with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. At 29, Carter had already made a name for himself in Oak Brook as the head of Prescott Enterprises, a sprawling real estate conglomerate that had its roots firmly planted in the town's history. Yet, beneath his polished exterior, Foley saw signs of strain. Carter's recent behavior had been erratic, bordering on unhinged. His meetings were now filled with tension, and he was often seen in heated arguments with his mother, Vivienne. As much as Carter loved Oak Brook, he loathed the idea of remaining in his family's shadow. He wanted control of the business, of his own life, and Ava's sudden disappearance seemed like the perfect opportunity for him to step into the limelight. As Foley interviewed Carter, he found the young man defensive, perhaps more so than he expected. Ava's always been dramatic. She's temperamental. It wouldn't surprise me if she ran off to clear her head for a while, he said, rubbing his hand across his jaw, his voice betraying the strain beneath the calm. But she never told anyone she was leaving, Foley asked, sensing an opening. No, she's not like that. But, I don't know, she's been distant lately, Carter responded, his eyes shifting. Foley pressed him further. Carter seemed to bristle at the notion that his sister might have been in trouble, and yet there was something in the way he dodged the question that made Foley uneasy. Why was Carter so eager to downplay the severity of the situation? Was it because he knew more than he was letting on? Vivian, too, was oddly calm. It wasn't that she didn't care, it was that she cared more about appearances than reality. Every move she made was calculated. Even in her grief, there was something in her composure that made Foley uneasy. He couldn't shake the feeling that Vivian wasn't just worried about her daughter, she was worried about the family's empire. As the search for Ava continued, Foley expanded his investigation. He interviewed friends of Ava's, trying to piece together what might have led to her sudden disappearance. He soon discovered that Ava had been acting strangely in the weeks leading up to her vanishing. She had been withdrawing from the social scene, no longer attending the glamorous events she once reveled in. Her friends had noticed that she seemed more anxious, as though something was weighing heavily on her. One close friend of Ava's, Jenna Williams, recalled a conversation she had with Ava just days before she disappeared. Ava was scared, Jenna said, her voice trembling. She told me she had uncovered something about the family, something that could destroy them all. She didn't say what it was, but I could tell she was terrified. Jenna went on to explain that Ava had become particularly close to a man named Kyle Johnson, a man with no apparent wealth or family connections. Kyle, in contrast to the Prescott's polished world, was a working-class guy who had fallen in love with Ava despite the objections of her family. According to Jenna, Ava had planned to leave Oak Brook and live with Kyle, far away from the pressures of her family. She had even confided in Jenna that she was planning to expose the Prescott family's darkest secrets, the ones that no one ever spoke of. Foley's suspicions began to grow. Was Ava's disappearance connected to the secrets she had uncovered about her family's business dealings? And, if so, who in the Prescott family had a motive to silence her? Foley's mind churned as he left Kyle's apartment. Every conversation with Kyle had brought more questions to light, but the answers were evasive, tangled in emotion and confusion. Kyle had claimed to care for Ava, but his reluctance to come forward earlier felt like a red flag. What had kept him silent? Did he know more than he was letting on, or was he just a man caught in something much larger than he could comprehend? Foley's thoughts returned to Ava's secret relationship. Why hadn't she told him about Kyle? Was she hiding it because she feared her family's reaction? Or had she already known that Kyle could never be a part of the world she was born into? Foley found himself returning to Prescott Manor, a place that had once symbolized everything Oak Brook stood for: wealth, power, and influence. But as the investigation wore on, it had become a dark symbol of deception and manipulation. The Prescotts had constructed a perfect image for themselves, but beneath the surface, it was all a facade. He entered the study, where Vivian was now seated at her desk, the soft flicker of candlelight casting shadows on her face. She appeared composed, but the slight tremor in her hand as she stirred her tea betrayed a subtle unease. "Is Ava really gone, Vivian?" Foley asked, his voice steady but edged with the weight of everything he had uncovered. Vivian paused, her gaze flickering up to meet his. There was no immediate response, just a long, drawn-out silence. Then, with the coldness only a Prescott could master, she spoke. "Of course she's gone. She was never going to be happy. Here. She didn't understand what we've built. It's all so much bigger than her. She couldn't accept that." "You don't think she was just running away, do you?" Foley pressed. "She was about to expose everything. Everything you've worked so hard to hide." Vivian's gaze hardened and her voice lowered, almost a whisper. "Don't talk to me about the past, Detective. You don't know what it takes to build something that lasts. Ava. She was a child who thought she could undo all of this." Foley's instincts screamed at him. Vivian knew more than she was letting on. "And Carter?" He had remained eerily absent throughout most of the investigation, but the guilt on his face whenever they spoke about Ava spoke volumes. It was time to put the pieces together. The more Foley learned, the more the picture became clear. The Prescott family's wealth wasn't just built on real estate deals and investments. It was built on blood, lies, and unspeakable actions that no one ever spoke about in public. Ava had stumbled upon the skeletons in the closet, and she had started to ask too many questions. Foley spent countless hours piecing together the puzzle of Prescott Enterprises. As he dug deeper into the financial records, he noticed something that caught his eye: a series of transactions with a private offshore bank account tied to Gregory Stone. Gregory, Nathan Prescott's business partner, had died under mysterious circumstances many years ago. At the time, his death had been ruled an accident, but the whispers Foley had heard hinted at something far more sinister. He interviewed Claire Foster, an old associate of Nathan's who had been there when the business first took off. She had witnessed firsthand the methods Nathan had employed to secure his empire, methods that involved more than just clever business deals. "Nathan wasn't just a businessman, Detective," Claire explained. "He was a predator. He didn't care who he hurt along the way. He made deals with people who were willing to turn a blind eye to whatever it took to keep the empire growing." Foley leaned in, trying to capture every word she said. "What about Gregory Stone?" he asked. "What happened to him?" Claire paused, her eyes scanning the room as if to make sure no one was listening. "Gregory. He wasn't just another business partner. He was Nathan's confidant. And when Gregory began questioning Nathan's methods, when he wanted out, that's when things went south. We all knew that Gregory's accident wasn't an accident at all." The revelation was chilling. If Gregory had been killed to protect the Prescott legacy, then what had Nathan really been capable of? And if Vivian had known all of this, was it possible she had a hand in it too? The picture that began to emerge wasn't just one of greed. It was one of murder, manipulation, and cover-ups that spanned decades. Foley's gut told him that Ava had learned something she shouldn't have. The moment she'd started to uncover the truth about her father's empire, it had become clear. She had to be silenced. Foley felt as though the walls were closing in on him. The investigation had started with one simple question: where was Ava Prescott? But now, the question had evolved into something much larger, and the answers weren't pretty. He was uncovering the truth, one piece at a time, but with each revelation he realized just how dangerous this case had become. The Prescott family was no longer just a wealthy dynasty. They were a criminal empire, one that would stop at nothing to protect their secrets, and that included silencing those who knew too much. The phone call came late at night, just as Foley was reviewing the final pieces of the Prescott case. His informant, an anonymous tipster, had led him to a secluded cabin on the outskirts of Oakbrook, a cabin that had been rented under a false name. The tipster had claimed that Ava's body was there. Foley drove quickly, his mind racing with the implications. As he pulled up to the cabin, his heart pounded in his chest. This was it. The final clue. The end of the road. He entered the cabin cautiously, his flashlight illuminating the dark, musty interior. His eyes quickly scanned the room, and then he saw it. Ava's body, cold and lifeless, lying on the floor. Her once beautiful face was pale, her eyes staring blankly ahead. But it wasn't just the sight of her body that chilled him. It was the letter he found next to her. It was clear, concise, and damning. Ava had known everything. She had uncovered the truth about her family, and she had been preparing to expose them. Her final message to the world, to her family, was not one of surrender, but of defiance. "I won't let them win," the letter read. "Even if they kill me, the truth will come out." Foley stood there, staring at the letter, his mind reeling. Ava had been a brave woman, more courageous than anyone had given her credit for. She had known the risks of exposing her family, and yet she had gone through with it anyway. It was a tragic loss, but the truth had to be told. Ava had been silenced, but she had left behind a legacy that would not be erased. As the investigation reached its boiling point, Foley knew that he was getting closer to the truth. Every clue, every piece of evidence pointed to the Prescott family, and yet the final confrontation was still ahead of him. He called Vivian in for a final meeting at Prescott Manor, determined to get answers. She was waiting for him when he arrived, seated behind her desk as if nothing had changed. The mansion was as grand as ever, but the air between them was thick with tension. "Ava's dead," Foley said, his voice sharp. "You did it. You had her killed because she knew too much about your past, about Gregory Stone, about your father's empire. You couldn't let her ruin everything, could you?" Vivian's eyes flickered, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she stood slowly and walked toward the window. "You think you've won, detective, but you don't understand. You never will." Foley stepped closer. "No, I understand perfectly. You thought you could keep your secrets hidden forever, but Ava exposed you. Even in death, she's brought you down. It's over." Vivian turned, her expression cold. "You're wrong, detective. It was never just about the family business. It was about power. Power that's been in my hands for years. You think you've uncovered the truth? But you'll never know the whole story. I've played this game for far too long to be beaten by someone like you." But Foley didn't back down. "The game is over, Vivian. The truth is coming out, and you'll have to face the consequences for everything you've done." The trial was a spectacle that captivated the entire town of Oak Brook. The Prescotts had once been untouchable, but now their empire was crumbling before the eyes of the public. The truth about their wealth, their lies, and their dark past was exposed for all to see. Vivian and Carter stood trial for their roles in Ava's death, their once immaculate reputations shattered beyond repair. Foley watched from the back of the courtroom as the judge read the final verdict. Vivian was sentenced to life in prison for her role in orchestrating Ava's death, while Carter was given a lengthy sentence for his involvement in the cover-up. As the gavel came down, Foley couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. Ava's voice had been heard. The Prescott family had been brought to justice. But even as the dust settled, Foley knew that Oak Brook would never be the same. The Prescotts had ruled the town for decades, but now their legacy had been reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale. Ava Prescott had exposed the truth, and in doing so, had destroyed everything her family had built. And in the end, it was the truth that had won. The Prescott family's mansion, Prescott Manor, stood tall in Oak Brook, a town known for its opulent estates and quiet, seemingly perfect streets. Ava Prescott had always been the star of her family, beautiful, intelligent, and poised to take her place among Oak Brook's elite. But despite the perfect image the Prescott family projected to the world, Ava was hiding something that would eventually tear the family apart. On the night of the Prescott Foundation's annual charity gala, Ava disappeared without a trace. Her car was found abandoned on the outskirts of town, and there were no signs of struggle, no indication that anything out of the ordinary had occurred. But when Detective Grant Foley is called in to investigate, what initially seems like a simple case of a young woman running away turns into a much darker mystery, one that would uncover the twisted truth about the Prescott family's legacy. As the trial concluded, the final verdict was read aloud in the packed courtroom. For the first time in the history of Oak Brook, the Prescott family's empire had been brought to its knees. Vivian Prescott, the matriarch of the family, was sentenced to life in prison for orchestrating the murder of her daughter, Ava. Carter Prescott, her son, was convicted of complicity in the cover-up, and his life was forever marked by the dark truths his family had tried to bury. Ava Prescott's legacy, once marked by silence, had now become a symbol of truth and justice. Even in death, Ava had exposed the deep cracks in her family's perfect image. Her bravery had dismantled a dynasty built on lies, deceit, and blood money. What began as a search for a missing woman had turned into a quest for justice that would change Oak Brook forever. Detective Grant Foley stood outside the courthouse, watching as Vivian and Carter were escorted to prison. For a moment, he thought about Ava. Her courage had cost her everything, but she had won. The truth had finally emerged from the darkness. As he turned to walk away, Foley knew that Oak Brook would never be the same. The Prescott's empire might have been destroyed, but the ripple effects of their corruption would echo for generations to come. And in the end, it was Ava's voice, the one they had tried to silence, that had brought it all crashing down. And that concludes today's episode of Beneath the Surface. What started as a search for a missing person turned into a shocking investigation into the corruption and deceit that had been hidden beneath the surface of one of Oak Brook's most powerful families. Ava Prescott's courage in the face of certain death ultimately exposed the truth and dismantled the Prescott dynasty. Her story will live on as a reminder that no matter how deep the lies run, the truth always finds a way to rise to the surface. Thank you for joining us today. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that uncover the dark, hidden truths behind some of the most chilling true crime cases. Until next time, stay vigilant.